We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management, archaeology, and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast.
Good afternoon and welcome to episode 194 of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. I have a star-studded cast of folks here today to talk about cultural resources, archaeology, and a lot of points in between. My name's Bill White. I'm one of the normal co-hosts for the CRM Archaeology Podcast, but this time I'm actually leading the recording. So this is a first for me. Like I was talking, I haven't been the one who records in a lot of years, but I'm more than willing to do it because we've got some great folks here with us. We've got Tommy Ng in Canada.
Yeah, no problem.
Ayana Flewellen in California. Is that where you're at?
Yeah, I'm down in Long Beach.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And Desiree Martinez.
Hello.
All right. So anyone who's listened to this show for any amount of time knows that I've been on here for a while. So I want to make sure that I create space and time for other folks to tell us a little bit about themselves, introduce themselves. I don't know who wants to go first. Someone go ahead and start us off, please.
Why don't you go first, Bill, so we have an idea how to do it?
Calling me out, man. Usually I'm the one that hides. I'm like the color commentator that is in the background that every now and then says something. So I'm Bill White right now, and I'm an assistant professor of anthropology at the University of California, Berkeley. Before that, I used to do cultural resources for a long time in Arizona, Washington State, Idaho, California. I've been to a couple of different states, but mainly I did work in the American West. As a CRMer and as a professor, I focus on historical archaeology. How's that?
Sounds good.
Well, I guess you can go next then, Tommy.
My name is Tommy Ng, or sometimes I go by Tommy Yukon Ng. I am a lifetime CRMer based in Western Canada, specifically in Alberta. I'm a partner in my company called Bison Historical Services based in Calgary. I do a lot of my work from British Columbia all the way up to Saskatchewan and the Northwest Territories. I have done work in the States. I've done work in Ohio and West Virginia and throughout the Midwest and Southeast. My specialty, believe it or not, is fire broken rock, or what you guys would call fire crack rock. A lot of the indigenous people here, mostly the Treaty 7, Treaty 6, and Treaty 8 nations. My specialty is plains archaeology, so I spend a lot of my time here just surveying and excavating. That's about it. I don't think I'm just pretty boring. That's pretty much it.
I don't think you're boring. That sounds interesting. I have a million questions to ask you, but I'll let other folks speak next.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ayana Omilade Flewellen. I am an assistant professor at the University of California, Riverside in the anthropology department. I'm a Black feminist archaeologist who focuses on clothing and adornment, specifically looking at practices of self-making among African diasporic women from enslavement through freedom. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. In addition to my work, I'm also the co-founder of the Society of Black Archaeologists, and I sit on the board of Diving with a Purpose. So I look forward to talking about all of that as well.
Great, thanks.
My name is Desiree Martinez, and I'm Gabrielino Tongva, which are the indigenous people of the Los Angeles Basin and the 4 Southern Channel Islands. I am president of Cogstone Resource Management, which is a small women-owned CRM business located here in Orange County, but we are spread all over the United States, or should I say we're growing. And my own personal research is that of my ancestors here in the Los Angeles area, and also trying to get all of our ancestors home from all of the museums all over the world.
Thanks. That sounds great.
Sorry, Bill. I should just say I'm an archaeologist. I'm a Canadian with Chinese heritage, just to be clear, so we all know we represent various people of color, or back in my day, we used to call ourselves visible minorities.
Yeah. And you know, in archaeology, you are really visible. Well, so then the other, that's why this episode is so powerful, because we've got folks, I don't know if I'm at the top of my game. I would like to think that maybe I'll improve more, but we've got folks that have been doing this for a long time and have achieved quite a bit and are, moving forward with their careers in, really amazing ways. So I don't know if we've ever had a panel of folks like this on this show before. I don't remember a time when it was all archaeologists of color on this podcast. I'm trying to think of another archaeology podcast that had all people of color, but this is commendable. Yeah, this might be the first. You're right. I think it might be. One thing that I'd like to talk about, though, is I'd like to ask everybody when they realized that they wanted to be an archaeologist and when they first did their archaeology, because to get to where all the folks are here on this map, it didn't happen overnight. And one of the things that I've found before in the past is that archaeologists spend a long time wanting to become archaeologists before they actually get to do archaeology. So I guess, I'll go around the table again. I'll go last this time, though. I don't want to force any of you to go last. But the question is, when did you realize that you wanted to be an archaeologist? And then how long was it until you got your first archaeology? Does anyone want to, our first experience doing archaeology? Who wants to go first on that one?
I can go because I have a kind of a long story. So I wanted to be an archaeologist since 6th grade. And that stemmed from a field trip that I had in 4th grade to the Southwest Museum, which is pretty much the only museum at the time in Los Angeles that said anything about the indigenous people of the area and of California. And while we were there listening to the docent, and I actually write about this in some of the articles that I've written, the docent was talking about mission Indians, which is the term that was used for those Native people that came under the influence of one of the 21 missions in California. And so as she was talking about what life was like for the Native people prior to coming into contact with the San Gabriel mission, which is the mission that my people were associated with, one of my friends raised her hand and said, "Do the mission Indians still exist?" And she said, "No, they're extinct." And so of course, I knew that was incorrect, considering my family was from the Gabrielino community. And I had a lot of my friends question me then, saying, well, they told us that you were extinct, so how can you be Gabrielino or Native? And so when I had my 6th grade teacher, we did a unit on archaeology, anthropology. That's when I found that I could use archaeology to stem the misconceptions that people have regarding my community.
Wow.
And so I looked up what I needed to do to be an archaeologist, which was, get a degree in anthropology and then get a PhD in anthropology, archaeology as well. And that's what I set my sights to do.
Wow.
And I went to my first field school in Utah when I was 16 through the Upward Bound program. First day was horrible because it was 110 temperature, and digging in the dirt in the middle of the summer was horrible, and I wanted to quit, but I kept going and knew that that's what I wanted to do. And that's what I've been doing since, is using archaeology to correct all of the, myths and incorrect histories about the Gabrielino people, as well as all other indigenous people as well.
Man, that's powerful. Boy, oh boy. All right, who would like to go next? Tommy, Ayana?
I can follow. Desiree, your story is really powerful to hear about, the work that you're really taking on to address your people's histories as well as your people's present and future. I think that's fantastic work, and it's such needed work. For me, I was an undergrad at the University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida, back in 2009. And I want to say that my first field school was in 2000, either 9 or 10. And I worked with a man named James Davidson, who worked at the site called the Kingsley Plantation. And for those who know, the history of plantation archaeology that, morphed into African diaspora historical archaeology, it really began at plantation sites. And the first one that was excavated was Kingsley Plantation. So I feel like that class really sort of solidified for me that I wanted to do this kind of work. And I ended up in that class on happenstance. I was an exploratory major for the first, 2 or 3 years of 2 years of undergrad. I graduated in 3. And I ended up taking this class called The Archaeology of African American Life and History, because it was a class that was cross-listed between African American studies and anthropology. And I fell in love with the work in that class. And part of it is because James Davidson, who's a white man, set up that class to talk about the racial politics in the field. And it was centered in that class, which made me feel more possible to talk about race, racism, class, sexism, all of the sort of intersections with people's various facets of their identities. I don't know if it had not been for that particular class where I saw myself in the literature, thinking about the work of Teresa Singleton and Maria Franklin, that I would have even thought that the space was open to me. So, having that class and that field experience really opened up what was possible for me. And I knew that, after attending my first SHA, which I think was in 2009 in Austin, and being able to count the number of Black people on 2 hands, being able to count the number of Black women on 1, I was like, oh, okay, so we could do a lot of research, or rather folks are doing a lot of research since the 1970s, really late 1960s, on African American history and culture in the United States. But there wasn't a lot of space actually made for people who are of African descent to be doing that work. And that was really the foundation of what, SBA was built off of. And we could talk more about that later. But yeah, so that was really my introduction and what got me to stay in the field.
It's another amazing story.
Yes, my story started with a lie. When I was growing up, I have an uncle. He used to tell us we were descendants of Mongols. And when I was a kid, I always imagined I was a Mongol warrior riding through the steppes, just conquering, all that kind of stuff. Fast forward, I left the Army, didn't know what to do. So I went to university, specifically University of Calgary. I took some history courses. I was always interested in history. And I took a couple of archaeology courses of Dr. Jerry Odelar. And he started talking about the Blackfoot culture. At that time, he was saying how us archaeologists should be working together with members of the Blackfoot Nation. And that got my imagination going, because Plains culture, they're a lot like the nomadic cultures of the steppes. And I just kind of fell in love with that. But it was the inkling of the love. It didn't start until much later, until in my first year, I applied for my first CRM job. I got hired because they found out I could actually dig a trench really, really good. Problem is I had to slow down. And from there on, I haven't left CRM since my first year. And the more I got involved with it, the more I started working with various members of the Blackfoot Nation and the Tsuut'ina and the Stonies and everything like that. It's just my love for archaeology just grew. And it wasn't until later on that I found out a bit of my own family history, that I found out that I have 2 great uncles who were involved in building the Transcontinental Railway on the U.S. side of things. And I started learning more about my own heritage. So I'm still learning about my own heritage. There's the Chinese Canadian heritage here in Western Canada is over 100 years old, and it's pretty much well documented. But I'm learning little tidbits, especially at small towns where a lot of these Chinese Canadian restaurants, they're all in these little prairie towns, and usually these are the places where everybody congregates, where everyone gets together. So I'm still learning. So the more I get involved, the more I'm more fascinated. Just learning about my own heritage and working with various Plains nations.
Yeah, that's an amazing story too. And I also have worked with Blackfeet as a PhD student under my advisor, Maria Nieves-Cedeno, with John Murray as the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. I think he might be the TIPO that I remember most, but we also worked with other tribal folks. Once again, I was just a student, so I wasn't really leading any of the research, but the goal really was to try and use archaeology to increase the capacity of the tribe to be able to do cultural resources. And they're the only tribe I've ever been contracted to work to do CRM from the tribe. So they really have shaped the way that I think about working with indigenous people in archaeology. And, it's just amazing. That whole area is just so amazing, the Blackfeet Nation. And I went up to just visit Alberta, of course, Writing on Stone and some other locations. But I mean, just the whole history and all that stuff there, I can see exactly how you would be, you'd fall in love with that kind of work. That's just a great place to be.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful, especially when you're working with various Blackfoot elders. The stories they tell you, it's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a gift if you're given the privilege to hear their stories and everything. But you're right, man. You just hear these kind of things that you can't even really believe and that people still remember.
Yeah. Now you got me all choked up.
Yeah, I know. I mean, yeah, I love the Blackfeet area. I've wanted to take my family up there. It's that whole East Glacier area, man. It's just so amazing. I especially want to get there before all the glaciers are gone.
Yeah. Well, next time you're in Alberta, give me a call. I'll bring Stephen Wagner down.
I was going to say, you should make sure that we don't come, like, give us the fever test, all this other stuff. Like, right now is not the time to be letting Americans in. We don't know how to wear our mask properly.
I'm up for keeping our border closed. I don't know you guys. I don't know what's happening with you guys, but
it's the same carnival that it always is. Greatest show on earth, right? Well, so am I supposed to go next, or are we supposed to end the segment? I guess I'll go. I'll just keep it brief, though. When I was a boy, I started kindergarten in New York, actually in Mount Vernon, so right next to the Bronx. And one of our field trips was to the American Museum of Natural History. And I went through there and saw all these great exhibits as like a kindergarten boy, and realized, for one brief, second, that the Earth was just much older than I ever dreamed that it was. And there were dinosaur bones and all these different fossils from different parts of the world and gems and all this stuff. But the part that really kind of captured my attention was this old part that had all these Egyptian mummies and all this different stuff in there. And I just, it just kind of went into my brain that it'd be so interesting to learn about that stuff, to travel back in time. That was kind of the idea, that I'd be able to see these cultures as they existed. I decided that I wanted to do that as work, but the only person I'd ever seen do archaeology was like either Indiana Jones or the people on the public PBS stations on Nova and, these other shows. And they were always white people. So, for just whatever reason, I just always assumed that was something that white people did. But as I went on further, I realized that, that could actually be a job, and that maybe I should really go for it. But, as things go, when you grow up in a Black family, they push you to not to do something that when you go to college. If you make it to college, you're going to become a lawyer, you're going to become a doctor, you're going to become something else, either that, or you're just going to go to the military. Like, don't worry about this other stuff. If it ain't going to make money, it's not really something you should do. My parents were a little bit different, because they were kind of like, well, we're so poor, it doesn't matter what you do, just go to college, go to the military, do whatever it takes for you to get a life for yourself. And so I didn't really, if I said I started off in marketing, and they said, okay, that's a great idea. And my first day of school in college as an undergrad, I realized that marketing and business school was just not for me at all. Like, the things the professors were talking about, it was extremely clear that they actually had never really experienced real world forces, or that they weren't telling us about it. And so I kind of realized, this is going to be horrible for the next 4 years. Maybe I should just join the Navy after all. But my next class was an anthropology class, and that's when they broke down. There's 4 fields of anthropology in the United States, and archaeology is one of them. And I was like, well, so that's what you got to do to be an archaeologist? Well, I'm done with this business school. I can start a business any old time and see what happens, but I'm going to go for this thing and try to do archaeology. And really, that was kind of, where I kind of solidified the goal of going into archaeology as my career. And then I took my first field school, and I grew up in Idaho, so there wasn't really any archaeology, no public archaeology or anything like that back in the 90s that I can remember. It wasn't until the 2000s that there was really more public archaeology. So there wasn't a chance as a teenager or a kid to ever go and see any archaeology in action. But my first experience was, doing field school, and it wasn't quite 110, but it was in northeastern Oklahoma. And so 95 degrees there felt like it was 110 from someone from the desert West. But I remember using a pickaxe to break through a chip sealed driveway and doing all this heavy labor to find all this stuff. And it was just, everybody else was complaining about it, but to me it seemed fascinating. And then that's when I really realized that I could do it and that I was going to do it. And I just kept moving forward and, went on for a master's and did CRM and PhD. And now I teach archaeology. So it was a long time from that first idea in kindergarten that I was going to try to become an archaeologist. And then I had to push through all the social pressure to not go after that, to actually just go for something that I wanted to do for my own self. So it wasn't a very clear path, and it took a long time to achieve it. But just like everybody else, there was a personal motivation and kind of a goal that kept me going through all those times when I didn't think that I was going to be able to make it. And there's just still some level of curiosity or inquiry behind myself, the way my motivations right now that keep me moving forward. Well, I went a little long on this one. Maybe I'll go short on the next segment, but we're going to end this segment. We'll come back with the crew in a few minutes.
Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high-quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code CRMARC. Looking to expand your knowledge of X-rays and imaging in the archaeology field? Then check out An Introduction to Paleoradiography, a short online course offering professional training for archaeologists and affiliated disciplines. Created by archaeologist, radiographer, and lecturer James Elliott, the content of this course is based upon his research and teaching experience in higher education. It is approved by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists as 4 hours of training. That's in the UK, for those of you that don't know. So don't miss out on this exciting opportunity for professional and personal development. For more information on pricing and course structure, visit paleoimaging.com. That's PALEO imaging.com, and look for the link in the show notes to this episode.
All right, we're back with the CRM Archaeology Podcast, along with a star-studded group of guests that all work in archaeology. I mean, that's the key that we kind of ended up on, that you have this idea that you're going to do archaeology, but until you can actually turn it into a career or get paid to do it, it makes it really hard to do it. I mean, there is plenty of space for volunteers in archaeology, but the folks that want to be professional archaeologists, we've got to find some kind of a way to get a job. And so all of us get paid by doing archaeology. But I'm going to put this question out there specifically to folks who are training archaeologists and hiring archaeologists. I'll just put this out to everyone. If you've looked around at archaeology, you see there's not a lot of diversity. What are the main impediments to finding and hiring archaeologists of color?
In my career, I think we may have hired one person of color. Here in Western Canada, for some reason, we have a dearth of archaeologists from various backgrounds. A good, I guess, 99% of them are overwhelming white. So I can't say too much because all the resumes that come across my desk they're just all white folks. The various Indigenous participants I have on my crews, I always try and encourage them, like if they're interested, go into archaeology, because we need more Indigenous folks in archaeology. But for some reason, there's not very much. I only think of one person, Kevin Blackplume of the Blackfoot Nation. He's doing work for Parks Canada. And all the other ones, Ellen Yellowhorn and Ruby Reimer, they're all professors at SFU. And that's about the extent of my knowledge of how many Indigenous archaeologists are here in Western Canada. I can't say too much about Eastern Canada. That's a whole different country to me. So, but I do know the one person we hired, her name was Marguerite de Guzman. She's of Filipino heritage. So besides her and I, as far as I know, we're the only people of color CRMers in Canada.
Wow. I guess so. There aren't very many people of color in archaeology in general. Do you think that the universities take up those people faster than the CRM companies?
No, I don't think the university. I don't think it makes. I think it has to do with culture. If coming from my own background, from the Chinese background, you're pushed into become a lawyer or a doctor. I mean, that's the stereotype. If you have first generation parents, that's where they're pushing you towards. And a lot of the second generation, third generation, they don't know there's a career in archaeology. To them, it's a university setting. They never heard of CRM, and so a lot of them are not willing to tough it out by going to get the master's and get a PhD and get a tenureship at university. No, they just want to graduate, get into the workforce, and start living their life. That's back in the 90s or early 2000s. And I just recently talked to a colleague of mine, Laura Ng, from I think UCLA Berkeley. She said there's a lot of archaeologists of Chinese heritage coming up through that university, but as far as I know, none of them are going to CRM. They're all going there. They all want to do research and stuff like that. So as far as I know, at this point, me and Margarita were the only lone CRMers of people of color in this part of the world.
Wow, that's crazy. There's a lot of people that live in Alberta too.
Yeah, and I don't know what's like in the United States. Are they, besides the African Americans and Indigenous, are there any others? Are there any Asian Americans CRMers? I don't know.
I'll let Desiree and Ayana handle that one. I know the answer.
I've been doing this for 25 years. I never encountered anyone.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know like specifically for CRM, but the first person who I know that's of like Asian descent is Kelly Fong. Is that how you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, and she does really fantastic work. I don't think that she's in CRM.
She's not.
So, I also think of other folks who are of South Asian descent. I think of Flory Bergen over at Howard University as well. I think what comes to mind, which is also something that Tommy was touching on, which are the ways in which, people are pushed into specific career paths based on their cultural upbringing. And I think part of that also has to do with the culture within archaeology as well. There's a way that the representation of archaeology to the general public is white. And I feel like, if I were to ask my class and my students, what's the first thing that comes to mind? When I do it now, the person that comes to mind are the characters from Night at the Museum and National Treasure.
Yeah.
And those are both white men. So the sort of image that we have, Jacques Cousteau, if you want to go, those images of explorers, of people who are doing this kind of work, do not include people of color. And I think when we don't have that representation at a young age, then you don't see yourself in that field. That's one of the reasons why Dr. Alexandra Jones at Archaeology in the Community, with the two sort of cartoon characters that she has, one of which is a young Black girl, are so important, because it's so important to have representation that looks diverse for kids and students to then be able to see themselves in this field. I think another huge thing about it isn't just like hiring practices, but also training practices in order to, apply for these jobs in CRM, in order to apply for graduate school. If you want to take the academic route, you have to have had participated in a field school to get field tech experience. Field schools, we just, the group that I work with, and Bill's a part of it at the Estate Little Princess down on St. Croix, we're co-writing a paper that looks at community archaeology. One of the aspects of that is really thinking about the cost of field schools, which on average are about $3,000. And that's excluding whether or not you have to actually catch a plane to get to a site that's international. When you think about folks of color, also students who are low economic status or first generation students, that's not accessible to them. So part of it is also trying to make accessible field experiences for people to even have the training they need to be able to do this work. So I think about that. And then, I can go on and even talking about, Dr. Maria Franklin's work back in 1998, where she wrote, why are there no Black American archaeologists? And you could extrapolate that and ask in general, why are there no people of color who are doing archaeology? Part of it came around with the cost of field schools. The other part is on mentorship, being able to actually have people in this field who will take the time and invest in you to give you the training opportunities to really see yourself, to really see you as a potential candidate to do this kind of work. That's where a lot of implicit and very explicit, covert and overt bias come into play. So I feel like there are a number of ways to attack that question, and it simply isn't just from one entry point. There has to be entry points from a variety of different angles.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if it's perception, because if we're talking about, I'm second generation. I did grow up in a poor family. So I made it, I guess you could say, the epitome of in my archaeology career. I'm in the apex as owner of a company. But I'm wondering, because we also have a lot of second and third generations Asians here, and they're middle class, and yet they still don't consider archaeology as a career. And I'm just wondering, it's just because it's like Ayana said, because there's no representation, or they just think that there's no money in it. Because you got to think in terms of Chinese people. They want to make a good living, and that involves money, and they don't see archaeology as a viable career. I'm just wondering, is that the case in my own culture?
I'm not sure. I'm not Chinese American, but one thing you can tell to those folks is the only millionaire archaeologists I know all did CRM.
Yeah. I wish I had $1 million bucks.
Desiree, I want to make sure you have time and space.
No, I agree with everybody, all the various points. What's most important in terms of getting diverse people, particularly in CRM, is the pipeline. And for over 10 years, we're still running a project out on Catalina, but we ran a field school first through UCLA, then through Cal State Northridge. And a lot of the students that were coming to us, particularly from Cal State Northridge, were minority or students of color. And, again, a lot of that also had to do with cost. And it was one of the reasons why we moved from UCLA sponsoring the field school out on Catalina to CSUN, was because it was just way too expensive to get people there. And the way that we came out at our field school was that we were going to teach you skills in order to, be a good archaeologist, being guided by an Indigenous perspective, but also, hopefully to obtain the skills to get a job in CRM. And so particularly for my company, I don't want to say do a good job, but we have a lot of archaeologists who have various backgrounds through the years that we've been open and stuff like that. But it really is the pipeline, and it is everything. It is access to experiences. I would have not had my first field school if it weren't for Upward Bound, which is a TRIO program for low income first generation students. I wouldn't have had my second field school when I was a junior in college if it weren't for the Mellon Foundation, because I was a Mellon Minority Fellow. I wouldn't have been able to have any of those experiences because my family didn't have the money to be able to provide me with those experiences. So the money issue is a big thing that we need to get over. The family background, my family didn't want me to be an archaeologist because we saw archaeologists as grave diggers.
Yeah,
they only saw archaeologists as taking away from our sacred lands and our sacred spaces. And for me to even think about doing that and doing the disruption to our ancestors was a really big hurdle within my own personal family. But until I said, I'm going to be there to protect. And if an ancestor has to be uncovered, then I'd rather do it than have somebody else that didn't understand what it meant, to respect that ancestor and apologize for disrupting them. They finally came around, but it was just one of those things where I didn't have anybody to kind of guide me until I started meeting other Indigenous archaeologists in the early 2000s, where we came together to create a group and talk about these issues. I mean, so there's just so many things that need to be overcome in order to get students of diverse backgrounds supported to even start thinking about a career in archaeology, let alone CRM.
Yeah, those are really great points. There's something you said that I want to come back to, but real quick, I've been doing archaeology, getting paid to do it since about 2005. And in the course of all this, as a master's student, PhD student, I'd say that I've been the instructor or, one of the main teachers on, I think, 5 or 6 field schools, or also training programs. And of that, there's probably I think I probably taught like 50 students or so. I mean, I'd have to actually go back and write it all down, but 50 students from different tribes, different universities. And through all of that, I think of those 50 students, only 2 of them of any race or orientation went on to get a graduate degree. And only 1 of those people went on to get a PhD. So that's kind of in order to increase diversity, if we want to build that pipeline, we're talking like changing all those 50 students to actually reflect the demographics of where you're living or where you're working, then multiply it by like 1,000 to get to the point where you have 3 or 4 people that meet the Secretary of Interior standards that have a graduate degree. So like that, the hill that we're looking at seems, steep when we're talking about the total number of people who take a field school that go on to be an archaeologist. But if we were able to increase diversity in the field schools and not even teach more field school, just increase diversity, just that increases our chances of, finding a student of color, reaching out to that one student. That increases our chances, greatly, just by diversifying the field schools themselves. And say nothing to changing the actual curriculum and pedagogy so that it actually reflects stuff that matters to people of color. But there was a thing that you mentioned, Desiree, about respect and, connecting to ancestry that I think is, absolutely essential. Anyone is willing to respond on this one. But I guess I'll put this out there. Do you think that the way archaeology as it's practiced actually does respect ancestry and the cultural beliefs of people of color?
My experience, that depends on the situation. I came from a school of thought that archaeology, we should work together with our indigenous cousins. And I was fortunate enough to have done that. And I believe we should continue to do so. When I worked in West Virginia and Ohio, it was a whole different environment for me. It was just weird because there was just no indigenous people I was working with. It was just all white, and it was all from the white point of view. And for me, I feel uncomfortable working on various mound builder sites and stuff like that, because I'm just used, because here in Western Canada, we have a considerable indigenous population, and they're everywhere, and they influence everything here in Western Canada. But down there, it just felt different. It just, and I felt a certain amount of uncomfortability. And that's when I started learning about how the federal government, U.S. federal government, they're the ones had to recognize what a federal tribe is. Am I getting that right or wrong? Or
yeah, no. For a lot of the laws, the required consultation and connection between government agencies, it's only really mandated between federally recognized tribes.
It's a nation-to-nation thing. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's the way that the federal laws work.
Okay, so it's different in Canada. It's Blackfoot Nation. We a client, whoever a client work with, they get their mandate by the provincial government or even by the federal government. Just talk directly with the First Nations. So you don't need a government representative.
Yeah, and in the case of CRM, a lot of times that kind of hams things up because. First of all, there's a lot of tribes that didn't get federal recognition, and you're working on their ancestral land, and there's no requirement. So, of course, many people will just look past it. But also, we talked about this last week with the good faith effort, but there's not always that sincere motivation to connect between the government agency. And even if the archaeologists actually want to work with the community, a lot of times the way their contract is structured, they're kind of hindered from connecting with it. So if the client doesn't want you to talk to people, you could possibly lose your contract by doing so. It's supposed to be between the government agency and the federally recognized tribe, not between the CRM company or the archaeologist and the tribe.
It seems like the system is preventing archaeologists to work with the nations.
Yeah, exactly. That it's sad, but that's the truth, man.
But I think that has a lot to do with where you're at. In California, we have the California Environmental Quality Act, where there is consultation with non-federally recognized tribes as well, as long as they're Indian nation that was in California. But it's also up to CRM, and I try to talk a lot about this, is that the relationships when you're working with Indigenous people shouldn't be project to project. If you're a good CRM company, you are going to create a relationship outside of any projects with those Indigenous people on whose land you're on. And that way, that relationship that you've established can help with it, whatever project you're having. But, your students in any, undergrad or graduate are not being taught how to talk to Indigenous communities or even Indigenous people, in thinking about whether CRM archaeologists are respectful of Indigenous people. Right now, I can tell you no. There may be a few people that are far and in between, but I just know even before I was just in my own personal connection with CRM archaeologists, me being a tribal member, talking to CRM archaeologists, they dismiss me out of hand.
Wow.
And sometimes it has a lot to do with being I can never be an archaeologist, an Indigenous person, and a woman all at the same time.
Wow.
They only see me as an archaeologist in some instances. If they see me as a Native person, they discount my archaeological background and knowledge, thinking that they know more than me because they went to Oxford instead of me going to Harvard or whatever. I can't be all three. And so there's still discrimination out there. If I identify myself as being an Indian person, then whatever knowledge I'm trying to pass on to them is suspect. And they believe I'm biased, and thus I'm going to be supporting Indigenous people only and not thinking about archaeology. I mean, in terms of respect, it's just not out there.
Wow.
And so that was one of the big things when we were running our field school out on Catalina, is that you respect what Indigenous people tell you. If they're going to tell you something and you want to know more, there has to be that first, trust. And then, and it's not just about the archaeology knowledge, it's about the whole system that's out there, particularly out on Catalina. You can't just look at Manos and Metates and not understand how the island Tongva were connected to the environment, and knowing where all of the plant materials are that they gathered. It's all connected. That's how we come at it in terms of talking about our history. But it's very rare to have any type of student understand history in that way when they're solely looking at the material. And so if you don't respect the people that are giving you this information, then how are you going to respect any of the objects or items that you're going to be caring for during the course of your job?
And I totally agree with that, because here in Alberta, there's two ways of dealing with First Nations history. There's the archaeology component, where I just go in, I survey or excavate land, just for the physical remains. That's all. None of the ancillary stuff. And there's the First Nation consultation period, where you actually bring the elders and you talk about the inorganic stuff, the cultural aspect of all that stuff. So I'm actually removed from all that. And at times I'm actually involved with all that stuff, because sometimes they both intersect. But archaeology as itself here in Alberta, we're still stuck on the physical remains. We're trying to keep ourselves separate from the cultural aspect. And usually the people who runs the First Nation consultation process, they don't have an archaeology background. A lot of them tend to be either engineers or biologists or something like that. So it's a learning curve for them to understand or listen to the elders and stuff like that. And I can't say they do everything right. I mean, there's few who actually did some things right, but a lot of them tend to do a lot of things wrong. And it gets pretty political here. And so there's a fine line. And I agree with this, Ray. Archaeology, the Indigenous people, the Black Nation, they think we're here to steal their culture, and they have every reason to believe that, because there's a long history of archaeologists doing nasty things to the Indigenous people here. So, but at the same time, we grown up. We try to show them that we're trying to be more collaborative. We're trying to be more understanding. So it goes both ways. Is a lot of the elders, I'm trying to teach them, like, look, I'm not from that other generation. I'm this generation now, and I'm trying to understand things. I'm trying to interject of your culture into, because there's more to your culture than just this physical remains, and I need to understand it because it helps me. And they understand it too, but at the same time, they're also keeping a lot of their own culture to themselves. They want to keep it secret, and there's nothing more I can do about that. So
yeah. Yeah, it's complicated. We're only given a chance to know what we can know, and it really depends on the site, but also the people that we're working with. And there's some stuff that we're just not supposed to know.
Yeah.
I think this is a good place to stop for this segment. We'll end right here, and then we'll start another segment after the break.
You may have heard my pitch for membership. It's a great idea and really helps out. However, you can also support us by picking up a fun t-shirt, sticker, or something from a large selection of items from our TeePublic store. Head over to arcpodnet.com/shop for a link. That's arcpodnet.com/shop to pick up some fun swag and support the show.
All right, we're back with the final segment of CRM Archaeology Podcast episode 194. So at the end, the last segment, we were talking about like the importance of respect, and Tommy was mentioning that many of us are trying to demonstrate that we have grown up and that we actually are trying to understand more. And so, as with these times that we're all living in, with the race uprising in the United States, and a lot of folks in archaeology becoming aware that we haven't actually always been grown-ups, and we haven't actually tried to connect with communities. I think right now we're starting to see every archaeology organization try to make some kind of statement to say, hey, we're on your side, and many of us of color see these statements and we just look at them like, yeah, I'm sure you're on our side, just like you were all those other years when you never were on our side, but now all of a sudden you're on our side. So we appreciate the statement. I'm glad that I'm on your mind now, but I hope that I'm still on your mind when Christmas time comes, because that's when it's time for me to start asking things of you. But we're also seeing a lot of articles come out, including ones that I've been writing, blog posts and everything, that are addressing head on the lack of diversity and the need for diversity. And I think last month, no, I don't even know what the hell month it is anymore. 2 weeks ago, it seems like it was like whole months ago, I published, along with Dr. Catherine Draycott at the University of Durham in the UK, we published an article on Sapiens called Why the Whiteness of Archaeology is a Problem. And if you haven't seen it, if you're like the two people that do archaeology in the Western world that have not seen that, I think you should check it out. The other thing that I want you to check out is the comments, and not just the comments at the end of the article that are there, but the comments that have been going around, social media the last few days. So there's been kind of a phenomenon where folks who are interested in allying themselves with what Desiree and Tommy were mentioning in the previous segment of trying to be respectful and trying to learn more and listen first before we act. Those folks are saying that the article's okay, but there's a host of other people, and I don't know if they're archaeologists or not, that are demonstrating exactly why this article had to have been published and why it pretty much, I couldn't have expected anything besides that, because a lot of folks don't think that that's something that need to be, diversity is not really a problem. And that the reason why there's only white archaeologists is because people of color don't really care about archaeology, and that it's just not an issue where they live. And I'm not sure if a lot of these folks are coming from Europe, which has, their own relationship to race, but I definitely know that the phenomenon that you see in the comments is exactly what many of us have faced before. So I don't know, I think you all have checked that out, but I guess one of the questions that I have for you folks is, where can we go when we know that so many of the people in our field feel this way, that diversity is actually not something that needs to be addressed? This is a huge question, but what would you say to someone who says this isn't the fact that it's mostly white people doing archaeology is not a big deal, and why do you keep bringing it up? So what would you say to someone like that who's an archaeologist? I guess I can go first. The first thing that I would say, that I actually always do say when people come at that point, is, first of all, take a few seconds to breathe and react. Or rather than reacting, just take a few seconds to think about what is behind your reaction, because this isn't the first time that, I've been confronted with this kind of behavior from other archaeologists. So, before, I didn't actually have the power. A lot of times I was working for a company and that was my client, and I just had to take it on the chin because I wanted to feed my family. But in the other times I've been a student where I've had, people of power, professors or whatever, take that kind of approach. And I wish now that I had told them to just take a few seconds and breathe before they respond, because what's coming out is the emotions that have been programmed into them through the whole entire racialization process. Like their entire socialization process for them to be this kind of individual has been programmed over years, and their gut response is coming from pure emotion rather than actually thinking or listening to what's going on. So, the first thing is take a step back, and for at least 10 seconds, don't say anything, and instead think about your feelings and where in your body and mind and heart is this coming from? Is this coming from something that's actually quantifiable and associated to archaeology, or is this just some kind of emotional response that you always have when your race is confronted? Like, that's the first thing that I would always say. And I would hope that after that, we could actually have a conversation. And then I don't know where I would go from there. It depends on, how the individual is behaving at that point. If they actually listened to me and took a few seconds and was interested in being civil. But if not, I think now at this point in my career, I just turn around and walk away because it's really not something that I want to deal with. And it's not something that I need to deal with, because now I realize that it's not really my job to tell white people about race, regardless of if they're archaeologists or what. And so, my words can speak on the internet or whatever, or I can speak face to face to folks. But I guess I would just walk away for someone who was actually coming after me. I don't know if anyone...
You are better than me.
Well, that breathe part is also for me, so that my fist just releases. The fist is not a fist anymore, and I just calm down.
Yeah, there are just certain conversations that I'm actually not willing to engage anymore. And one of those conversations is around whether or not there are practices of racism, exclusion in the field of archaeology. I'm actually not willing to be in a conversation with someone where that is up for debate, because it's simply that's not a reality for me. And I refuse to even justify it with an engagement at this point. And part of that is also the work that I do, especially with the Society of Black Archaeologists and Diving with a Purpose. Like, I'm a part of a network of archaeologists doing extraordinary work for the betterment of this field, with or without people who see this field as racist. So it's like, if you're not at the table, that's perfectly fine, because we're doing work at the table regardless of whether or not you're here. And the work is fantastic. And that's like for folks like me who are like archaeologists of African descent, and those who work on heritage sites pertaining to the African diaspora. But there's also another amazing group called the Indigenous Archaeology Collective of Indigenous and Native scholars who are doing similar work, where it's just like the question itself is just it's not a reality. I'm not answering it. So when that comes up in my feed, I don't respond to it. And when it comes up at talks as well, because I've given a couple of talks where the same tired question has come up over and over again around why we need to have a Black feminist archaeology specifically. And to that response, I'm just like, wow, like, I'm actually not going to sit here and justify whether or not my research is valid. It is, period. If you'd like to have a conversation with me about my research, we can do that. But I'm not going to justify why we need to do and take an intersectional approach to the work that we do, why the experiences of Black women are valid. I'm not engaging in that conversation, because in my life, it's not up for debate.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's also another way I should, probably approach it too. Just not engage with that.
That goes for the same when for casual racism. I experienced a lot of casual racism in my profession, or in our profession. Like, I know a couple of archaeologists were calling me Chinaman a few times, all that kind of stuff, and I'm just tired of it.
Yeah,
I just ignore it. I just know why, because there's a place to fight. There's a time for battle, but this is not it. I gotta move on, because I don't know, either just do this to get a rise out of me, or I don't care anymore. I have better things to do. So I've become to a point where I'm just immune to all this casual racism that's happening around me. There's other things. I'd rather spend my time to deal with other things, and I'd rather pick my battles.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I don't think that a lot of folks listening to this understand how much energy and how much time and everything is sucked away from us because of these kind of things. When people are just trying to get a rise out of you instead of focusing on what they're supposed to be doing and stuff. That's the kind of stuff that some people wake up in the morning. They don't really have to worry about that kind of stuff, and they can go through their whole day and all the jokes are funny to them. But, we're a lot of times the ones who bring that kind of stuff home, and we have to try to figure out some kind of way to take care of ourselves and self-heal our own selves because of the damage that other people are doing in the workplace.
I'm just tired of people who said they want to know where I was born. Because they expecting the answer. I was born in China. I was never born in China. I was born in England. My extended family's been here for over 100 years. But that's the answer's not good enough, because the expectation is I'm supposed to be from China. That's how they see it. And therefore, that's where the other comes in. I was like, what? I can't be a Canadian?
Yeah.
It's like I'm other than a Canadian. And I'm just tired. I was like, I don't ask anybody where they were born. I don't care. Mm-hmm. But why did you have to ask me?
Yeah.
I don't have an accent. So.
Yeah. Well, I would just say make sure they're not from the United States till after the plague's over. We can be friends after that. But like from now on, you might want to say, oh, you were born in Maryland. Like, I don't know if you should really. Where's your mask?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. These are all, we started off with powerful stories of motivation. Then, here in the end, I'd like to start, moving towards ways that we can heal and improve things. But, I just definitely didn't want us to end without acknowledging this straight up, that, this is everyday stuff that's happening to us all the time. And so, when you see these kind of things about, a Society of Black Archaeologists, well, why should there be one, or why should there be an Indigenous Archaeology Collective? Well, I think it kind of, it says it for itself, because the space that we're in, along with other white archaeologists, is not always the kind of space that's conducive to us becoming better archaeologists or people or anything. By being with ourselves, we create some time and some space for us to be with each other without having to worry about these kind of, casual racism, overt racism, or, backlash. But moving on into the last bit, we've got a few more minutes. How can we address diversity in the field? Because I honestly do feel that there's power in numbers. And if you've got people that you can kind of relate to on your crew, and you can, have that kind of personal bond with, I do feel like that's the kind of thing that will help keep a lot of the students and a lot of the young archaeologists in the field. So I'd like to leave with, do you all have any suggestions for increasing diversity in the field? What are the things that we need to focus on?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's the question I deal with all day.
I think the work that Desiree is doing, specifically around targeting undergraduate populations from underrepresented groups, is fantastic work, because it's providing those opportunities to students who ordinarily wouldn't have access to them, that really set the foundation for getting more people of color into our discipline. And Bill, we work on the Estate Little Princess project, and we're part of the UC HBCU Historically Black College and University Initiative. And I think the UC system is actually trying to get one for what they call Hispanic serving institutions, although that term itself is is outdated. But it's having those programs specifically targeted towards training students that are at low to no cost, that allow entryways onto this field. And I also think it's really important to support networks and for scholars of color out there to build their own networks. Like, there's a way that the Society of Black Archaeologists has a number of South Asian and Latinx members, specifically because there needs to be a space for people of color to gather. And we're grateful that SBA can be that. And it's also like, we understand the particularities of like what SBA is about, centers on the African diaspora, and the needs of other racial and cultural groups are specific. That doesn't mean we don't want you there, but it is like an acknowledgement that our peer review is very specific. And I put value in knowing that having spaces that are for Asian and South Asian scholars of color are important. Having spaces that are for Latinx scholars of color, that is important, So being able to have those network spaces, I think also provides avenues of access and pathways once you're in this field to sustain yourself while you're in it.
I'd like to add to that real quick about SBA focused, like Native American tribes and tribal historic preservation offices can teach a lot to the SBA because we're just starting off and everything. But, in my own experience, learning about what it is to do archaeology among descendant communities, I learned that I've done a couple of projects with Black folks and many projects with Native American groups. So I've gotten most of my experience from there. I feel like building those bridges is, critical to all these different groups.
So one of the things that I think is most important, which sometimes we just focus on what we as individual archaeologists can do in order to increase diversity, but we really have to put the onus on the CRM firms. And I say that because it is on the backs, blood, sweat, and tears of Indigenous people's history and other marginalized communities' history that they're building a career on. And one of the things that we do here at Cogstone is that we actually have an internship that we have in the past. We haven't done it in the last year, but working with Cal State Long Beach students, in particular their Native American Studies program, to do a class in helping them learn about curation practices. So, one of the big things about archaeology is always focusing on the digging, but we're never focusing on the lab work or any of the other research that needs to happen. And so at the same time that we're helping to do this internship, we're also helping Cal State Long Beach become into compliance with their NAGPRA responsibilities. And so we have a lot of conversations with the students who are predominantly students of color and talking to them about not only, how to care for the objects that have come out of the ground, and also talking about Tongva history because these objects are from Tongva territory, but also talking about the implications and legal aspects that these institutions have to deal with in terms of having these collections within their caretaking. And so, we really need to push these CRM firms in all aspects. I know there's small mom and pops, but there are these companies that are making millions of dollars off this history, and nothing is giving back to the community. And part of giving back into the community is providing educational opportunities in order to help diversify both the academy and our CRM world.
Even the CRM firms in the States are making that much money. I'm in the wrong country.
I think if you want to stay alive, you're in the right spot. Yeah, there's just so many different ways to add to this. We could keep going on forever, but we're pretty much at time. Does anyone have any last words? Anything they'd like to say?
I would like us to do this again.
I think it's a good idea.
I think this conversation needs to continue, and I think we're just on the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, we can't fit it all in an hour, can we?
No.
Well, I think everyone here, I appreciate you all your time and all your amazing effort. I don't think anyone here gets enough thanks for all the work that they're doing. But, folks out there listening to the show, we are here. You can send emails to the CRM Arc Podcast's email, or you can connect with us on social media. And if you are a student of color, or you're a archaeologist of color, and you don't have a network, here's 4 people here. At least that's 4 people. That's 4 more than you knew before. So go ahead and reach out to us. Send us a message. To my guests here today, thank you very much for spending this time here on a Sunday, taking time out of the middle of your day to record this for folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRMArcPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye. This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.